When I was a kid, my mom and dad had managed to get their hands on a CD. This CD contained the full catalog of Michael Jackson's music videos, and from the first day I got a taste of his music and dancing, I was hooked. I don't really know how many times I rewatched each music video, but I can tell you for sure that it was definitely not healthy for a kid my age, considering some of the things implied in those videos. The CD also contained video footage from some of his concerts. Imagine a kid less than 10 years old, watching spectators in the crowd tightly packed like bags of rice stored in a warehouse. They were so enamored, so excited from MJ's presence. They would shout and sweat, jump up and down, and after everything, they would fall asleep. You see, as a kid, I wondered why people all of a sudden fell asleep. Didn't they want to watch Michael's performance? At the same time, it was weird seeing adults acting like kids. Like me, back then. Then again, I don't really think I was as restless as they were. My dad was probably the one that explained the situation to me. Apparently, some people were so enamored by Michael's presence, so excited that they sometimes exhausted themselves into passing out. Now, it's possible these things happened due to long periods of time waiting in line, or extreme BO perceived from a fellow spectator. But the fact that these things could happen to people because of another person was so alien to me that I, being the kid that I was, could only accept the fact and move on with my life. Now I'm older and I've come to realize that this particular kind of behavior is more common than I once thought it to be. Growing up, I've come to realize that the vast majority of people act that way, at least towards something or someone with varying degrees. There are certain things that drive us human beings to do things that others might consider irrational or even immoral. The Twitch streamer Clavicular is willing to smash his face in repeatedly to make himself look more attractive. Certain individuals have risked their lives climbing the highest mountains and descending into the lowest depths, all in the name of conquering nature or themselves. Looking at all this, I ask myself, why? What compels the human mind to do crazy things, sometimes horrible things so absurd that it makes onlookers cringe or feel embarrassed for you? Why do so many people check into churches, mosques, and other religious buildings weekly in the name of worshipping some entity they've never perceived with their five senses? Following the religious connotations of the action of worship, can we also apply that to everyday human life? Is there something you cherish way too much? Something you've probably told yourself you can't live without? Maybe an El Cinco or that girlfriend you've been telling your friends about that doesn't exist. We all tend to be irrational sometimes, but in certain cases, people cross the threshold of simple irrationality and do things so weird and crazy that one can only ask questions that will never get sensible answers. If I were to ask you what the first account of idolatry was in the Old Testament, you might mention Rachel stealing Laban's gods or the golden calf smelted by Aaron in Exodus. These are all valid accounts, but I would actually go further back to the Tower of Babel. I know this doesn't count as idolatry in the traditional sense, but I believe this to be the worship of humanity itself, at least from the biblical narrative. The idol in this case is mankind's ambition, an ambition we harbor till this very day through our desire to create things through technology, through our observation of the universe, through our study of one another. Taking into account my non-theistic viewers, our search for perfection can be philosophically redefined as our quest for godhood. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, as Christians believe we were made in his image and likeness, thus we believe humans are naturally inclined to want to be like him, although we will never actually become him. What's the alternative to not worshipping God or any god for that matter? Idolatry. Now, to be fair, theists, specifically monotheists, are the only sets of people that can use this word because it's tied into their religion. Christians can't worship anything except for God. Same goes for Muslims and Jews. Hence, they refer to anyone within their sect worshipping anything aside from their gods as idolaters or apostates, and they excommunicate them from their circles. This might seem extreme, but hasn't that been the case for most of human history? I mean, look at Democrats and Republicans, for instance. On the Democrat side, the moment you say anything against sexual progressiveness, you're deemed an outcast. On the Republican side, the moment you entertain any idea of socialism or communism, you're seen as stupid. It might seem like these people are simply playing the game of politics. I agree, they are playing the game of politics. But have you noticed they do this while plastering their ideologies on their bodies? People in the past would think they were part of some religion. Well, they obviously aren't because they don't meet the requirements of being classified as a religion, but they definitely carry themselves that way. Having a set of mandatory beliefs, proliferating the them against us mentality, things like this tend to attract tons of people. People love it when they can believe in something bigger than them. This then brings us to the definition of an idol. The Oxford Dictionary defines the word idol as a representation of a god used as an object of worship and related senses. Now, an object of worship, such a vague term, they are material objects as well as immaterial objects. Concepts, ideas, and emotions are all immaterial objects. Historically, various religions would worship a man-made object, otherwise known as a cult image. Typically, these objects were made with physical materials. But what if we treated ideologies and abstract concepts the way we treated physical objects in this scenario? What I'm saying might sound stupid, but just stay with me. The oldest known idol is estimated to have been carved 11,500 years ago. So man has been worshipping a lot of physical objects for a while. To strengthen my argument, we should also determine what worship entails. The word worship was derived from the Old English word worship. I don't know how to pronounce that, meaning to venerate, which can be defined as honor or respect shown to an object or deity. Now, this comes in varying degrees. The Greeks, for instance, had a large pantheon of deities, but only a select few were revered more than their counterparts. Hence, it is quite possible for someone who claims to be Christian or Jewish to worship something greater than them, such as a concept which will possibly outlive them or someone who has more power than them. And by power, I mean the political or monetary kind. This can also be shown throughout history when you look at the deification of the pharaohs of Egypt or the posthumous deification of Julius Caesar by the Roman Senate. In the Old Testament, the Jews, after escaping Egypt, decided to create an idol and worship a golden calf, a man-made object. Unsurprisingly, people often worship man-made objects, concepts, or ideologies by dedicating their lives to them. Political ideologies, materialism, hedonism, personal success, or even what some people today refer to as body positivity can all lead to a form of idolatry. So therefore, I would define idolatry as the substitution of anything, living or non-living, tangible or abstract, in the place that rightly belongs to the concept of an all-supreme God. In Machiavelli's Prince, he gives an account of Cesare Borgia and his minister, Messer Ramiro de Occo. When Borgia had acquired control over the Romagna region in central Italy, he found it in turmoil, ruled by weak masters who mistreated their subjects. To restore order and bring back peace and obedience, he had his minister, de Occo, appointed and given free rule over the province. In The Prince, de Occo is described as a swift and cruel man, hence why Cesare chose him for the job. Once de Occo had successfully restored order to the region, albeit through intense cruelty, Cesare realized the actions of de Occo might instigate hatred towards him from the people. To redeem himself in the eyes of the people, he had de Occo executed and left his body hanging in the public square of Cesena, cut in two with a block of wood and a bloody knife beside it. Machiavelli recorded that this event had the people satisfied and dismayed, effectively washing Cesare Borgia off de Occo's cruelty, yet at the same time reaping the fruits of the order it produced. Since Machiavelli believed Cesare Borgia to be a model ruler and actually uses this account to defend one of his claims on governance, We can then deduce that Machiavelli, as well as Cesare Borgia, would rank the interests of a ruler higher than the interests of the masses that make up a ruler's state. Borgia's intent was not solely on instilling order, but in being the source of order. The man wanted to be viewed as a god in the eyes of the people, and the orco was simply the offering he placed on the altar. Power, like everything we humans crave, is not limited by our morals or principles. In fact, the more power an individual acquires, the easier it gets for them to be tempted by more power, more money, and more pleasure. Hence, like money, power is a tool, and like money, power can be misused. But in the wrong hands, it becomes a vehicle for ego, intellectual vanity, and hedonistic excess. Most of the greatest crimes in recorded history were carried out by powerful and rich men. Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot. Herod sanctioned the killing of infants because he feared the loss of his power. So the question we ask ourselves in this, why do men crave power? Well, for one, I would say that it gives a sense of control, of order over one's life. When you're poor or working class, the concept of power is being able to live life comfortably. For the elites, power is power. For some elites, they grow up with so much power that once they get older, it's only natural for them to want more. In some cases, they were raised that way, like Alexander the Great, raised by his father, Philip II. Now, due to my lack of experience with vast amounts of power, or money, I'd like to draw on the teachings of someone who had actual bread. As the son of a famous physician to the Macedonian king, Aristotle lived a life of comfort and opulence, partly because he inherited it, partly because he was the teacher of Alexander the Great. So yeah, our boy Aristotle had experience with money. Aristotle is considered the father of the ethical framework of virtue ethics. Thus, he would use this framework to inform his moral decisions, which were focused on the pursuit of virtue and the search for the golden mean, or balance between extremes. In the particular scenario we are looking at, he would consider the virtue one could acquire from earning money and from spending it. He highlights two specific virtues regarding the use of money: liberality and magnificence. Liberality involves finding the balance between stinginess and reckless spending. Too stingy, and you harbor the vice of a glutton. Too lavish, and you bear the marks of a hedonist. According to Aristotle, if a liberal man were to spend money in a manner that is contrary to what is right and noble, he would be pained, thus attributing the sense of nobility to one's own conscience. Magnificence, on the other hand, is the virtue associated with large-scale spending. According to Aristotle, a magnificent man will spend money gladly and lavishly. He will inquire how the work can be made most beautiful and elegant, rather than what its cost will be, and how it can be done most cheaply. Now, this isn't to say a magnificent man is to only spend huge amounts of money for the social good. Magnificence can be practiced in private, such as weddings or when it is of special interest to the state or governing classes. The magnificent man should build his house in a stylish way suitable to his wealth. A stylish house is beautiful and decorates the society, thus in a sense acts as some kind of public ornament. It's important to note that not all liberal men are magnificent, but all magnificent men are liberal. This is because of the huge gap in resources. For instance, if a middle-class man wanted to practice liberality, he could decide to aid his local beggar with a meal every week, or donate money to his church, because according to Aristotle, these things are noble and are done for the greater good. Aristotle also states that a liberal man or magnificent man is one who spends the right amount of money at the right time, for the right occasion. Hence, it would be wrong for a middle-class man to want to spend as much money as a magnificent man, for that would make him a fool. Virtue ethics is all about balance. Hence, it would equally be wrong for a rich man to want to cut corners in spending money, which brings us to modern-day elites. The rich men of the 21st century have perfected the vices of deficiency and excess. A deficiency of magnificence is referred to as meanness, and an excess of magnificence is referred to as vulgarity. These two vices go against what is noble, hence we find individuals like these spending the wrong amount of money for the wrong reasons. Concerning the virtues of liberality and magnificence and their immoral counterparts, They are not limited to only expenditure, but cover the topic of acquisition as well. A rich guy who exploits his workers can never be magnificent, for his loyalties do not lie with nobility, but with the acquisition of wealth. There's also the way in which the wealthy find loopholes, or even write loopholes into the law to further aid their quest for more monetary gain. Because unrealized gains are not taxed, billionaires or millionaires instead borrow against their assets for cash, which is also not taxable. Hence, in countries like the US, we have the elite paying less tax by effective rates than the majority of the population. Although, to be fair, by total dollars, the top 1% cover about 40% of all federal income tax collected in the US. This still doesn't change the fact that the world's richest individuals do everything they possibly can to evade paying taxes to the government. Due to their lack of nobility in this regard, they are deficient in magnificence. On the opposite side of immoral spending, we have vulgarity. Spending too much for the wrong reasons. Now, there are various records of vulgar leaders throughout history, but recently, a couple million documents all related to one man were released late last year. These documents are a practical example of the depths of vulgarity. We then ask ourselves, why do men go to such lengths to perpetrate such things? Tophet was a place in the valley of Hinnom, just outside Jerusalem, where children were reportedly sacrificed to Molech. Jeffrey Epstein may or may not have worshipped Molech, but he definitely worshipped something. Would it have been his money? No, I don't think so. Money is a tool, and besides, it was born into wealth. What he worshipped was himself. He believed himself to be God, thus enabling him to place his desires above the lives of others. Hence narcissism, hence sex crimes, hence vulgarity. Fortunately for Epstein, he was born rich, hence he did not know what it was like to need money. But what about the average person? In Nigeria, we have the police who are known for collecting bribes. The world is filled with people willing to give their bodies away for money. So people refer to it as empowerment, but if people are willing to destroy themselves, destroy their bodies for the sake of money, would it be so far-fetched to say they worship the grain? It's said that if you want to understand the philosophy of a group of people, you simply pay visits to their gods. There's no culture in recorded human history that has not practiced some form of religion. The word religion traces itself from various non-English words, religio in Latin meaning restraint, or, most likely, religionem, which means to show respect for what is sacred. The word itself in modern times is used to identify an organized system of beliefs and practices leading to a transcendental spiritual experience. In ancient times, religion was indistinguishable from what is known as mythology. Due to the lack of technological advancement and just overall ignorance of the world, evolutionists make the theory that men came up with religion as a means of survival. Living in 2026, people have the luxury of living in a time where information is easily accessible. Theories and laws which give order to the universe are as popular as Odin and Thor would have been among the Vikings. The first written records of religious practices date to circa 3600 or 3500 BC from Sumer. Mesopotamian religious beliefs held that human beings were co-workers with the gods and labored with them and for them to hold back the forces of chaos which had been checked by the supreme deities at the beginning of time. One of the most well-known tales expressing this idea is that of the deity Marduk, who created the universe by defeating Tiamat and the forces of disorder. This gives insight into man's disdain for disorder. Due to our rationality, we are very inquisitive creatures. We like to know things. We want control, and this pattern is recognizable in all aspects of human life. So if a group of people found it hard to be in control of what was going on around them, it's kind of easy to understand why they would end up worshipping some of these mythological figures. As humans, when we come across something we don't understand, a common reaction is anxiety or fear. Religions helped early man to explain things which gave him peace and order. Stephen Rice, a professor of psychology who studied human motivation for 20 years, conducted a survey with a couple thousand people and asked them to rate the degree with which they embraced hundreds of different possible goals. He and his colleagues identified 16 basic desires we all share: acceptance, curiosity, eating, family, honor, idealism, independence, order, physical activity, power, romance, saving, social contact, status, tranquility, and vengeance. Now, according to Rice, we all share the same 16 goals. What makes each of us different is the degree with which we value each one. Based on Rice's model, religion plays a key role in satisfying each of these 16 desires, hence why so many people align themselves with any religion. The funny thing is, people don't even have to be or think exactly alike. Religions are known for attracting polar opposites when looking at the model. For example, religions can attract a vengeful person based on teachings of justice and fairness. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, religion propagates teachings of peace and love, which can be appealing to pacifists. Religion can attract the sly mind of an emperor looking for a political means of unification, or it can attract a slave looking for some form of dignity. The first is a man with extreme power, the latter is a man with none at all. Hence, it's not just the fact that religion brings order to our lives, but the fact that it relatively satisfies most of these desires. Now, because Rice's theory is based on motivation, it can help us determine the likelihood of someone being religious, or it can help us understand why certain people are religious and others aren't. Let's say, for instance, someone is highly independent. This person is going to have a harder time being religious than someone that is highly interdependent, because the life of a religious man or woman will involve a lot of get-togethers and communion with members of their own faith. Something else we can look at is how religion gives meaning and identity to its members. Philosophy as well as history has shown that man cannot live a fulfilling life simply satiating his desires. A man with no desires is not living, and a vulgar man who prioritizes his desires above all else is a beast. So, like Aristotle would do, we should look for some sort of middle ground. Discipline, morals, and principles are all virtues that can be acquired through religion. Vices, on the other hand, heavy drinking, hookup culture, and just plain hedonism as a whole, don't really make one happy. I mean, King Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. He was one of the richest men in his part of the world, and he still ended up writing, speculatively, one of the most depressing books in the Bible. Another thing that interests me about religion is the fact that you would find it very hard to find two which are exactly the same, showing us how creative and diverse the human mind is. For example, let's take a look at polytheistic religions. Most of the early religions contained a pantheon of deities which could give us insight into human relationships. Early and even modern humans believe that one human can't perform the role or meet the satisfaction required for all possible human relationships. You can have one relative who is a father, but your dad can't be your sister or brother or mother. This is because each of these relationships would require different individuals. There are situations, of course, where a person can change roles. For instance, a friend marries your sibling, thus becoming an in-law. Early men saw this and thus believed that the same applied to the cosmos. One person couldn't have created everything, they thought. Hence why we have religions with thousands of deities, because early men, separated by differences in culture and experience, needed gods that helped them with their day-to-day lives. Vikings, being a primarily warring community, had gods who assisted them in their conquest. Or, they believed assisted them in their conquest. Their ideology itself rewarded death in battle. There's also Thor, the god of thunder, who uses his hammer to create thunder and lightning. The Vikings would pray to him for safe passage on the sea, hoping that his thunderstorms would avoid them. The Aztecs lived in a region prone to drought. Hence, among their pantheon, they attributed huge importance to the god Tlaloc, the god of rain. But you see, the problem with polytheistic gods is their lack of omnipotence, and there's also the fact that they tend to harbor human vices as well, like Zeus's adulterous nature. It was appealing to follow these religions because people could easily relate themselves to these mythical figures who were both virtuous, yet succumbed to the appetites of the flesh. These deities bore the image of what it meant to be a good man or woman in different cultures. The Vikings, who saw drinking, whoring, and military conquest as essentials of manhood, elevated Thor to a religious icon among all the Norse gods. If you wanted safe passage on the sea, go ask Thor. If you want many sons, go pray to Thor. Religion not only plays the role of giving people meaning, it also aids them in finding their identity. This is one reason why a huge portion of the world is still attached to religion. I, being a follower of religion myself, find it very hard to imagine a universe without my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Same goes for every religious person in all of human history. This is why it can be very hard to evangelize a religious person because typically their religion is going to be tied to their identity. But aside from religion, what other belief systems could steer the emotions of other people? Political ideologies play a role similar to religion in the 21st century, and it can even be argued that these ideologies are a form of religion. The difference is instead of worshipping something or someone transcendental, we worship humanity itself and strive to shape it according to our own defined frameworks. Through this, we have seen a rise in radical political beliefs which can be compared to the likes of so-called religious extremists. You have people wishing for the death and sometimes even celebrating the murder of political opponents, all in the name of man-made abstract concepts. You see, like religion, belief systems are a product of communities, or people who create them. Take for instance Karl Marx. He spent most of his life poor. The man who wrote the blueprint for redistributing wealth could not even manage his own finances. So it's not hard for one to come up with the argument that he came up with communism as a means to alleviate his poor quality of life. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have free markets. You see, unlike Karl Marx, Adam Smith was actually quite good at managing his money. Unlike Karl Marx, who was loud, messy, and publicly scandalous, Adam Smith was basically a chill, humble guy. So humble, in fact, that he deliberately burned almost all his personal papers. Although he was the father of an ideology people attribute with greed, he gave away most of his wealth secretly to people in need. Adam Smith embodied nobility in the best way possible, away from the spotlight. His ideology, though abused and tainted, is still a product of his experiences and what he believed a community should be like. This can be connected back to religion. Christianity, for example, has been tainted over the course of history, but if one were to read the Gospels, they would see that those actions and vices carried out by Christians across history were never actually sanctioned by their own religion. Thus, in the end, what happens is people over time forget the tenets and teachings of a religion or ideology and then begin to taint the precepts of said belief system with their own desires. Thus, we end up having people worshipping the worst entities in all of existence, themselves. Man, since the very beginning, has always needed something to bow down to. Whether it's a golden calf, a stack of cash, a political ideology, or a god carved out of wood. The impulse is the same. We are creatures of worship by default. The question was never if we worship, the question has always been what we worship. Sometimes when you strip away the religion, strip away the ideology, strip away the money, what you're often left with is a person who has made a god out of themselves. Like every corrupt religion and every tainted ideology we've looked at today, self-worship produces the same results every single time: degeneracy, vulgarity, and ruin. The impulse to worship is not something you can logic your way out of. You can reject God or you can reject religion. You can reject every ideology on the spectrum. But you will fill that space with something. You always do. We always do. I always do.